your reflection looking back to pull you down. So are you gonna die today or make it out alive? You gotta conquer the monster in your head, and then you'll fly, fly, phoenix fly.
So that right there was Phoenix, featuring Kaylin Russo and Chrissy Costanza. It's a huge pop anthem, and it's the theme song for the 2019 World Championships of League of Legends. Now, League of Legends is one of the most popular online multiplayer games in the world, and it's also a massively popular esport game. Esports, for those of you that might not know, is a form of sport competition involving video games. And there is no bigger esports event than the League of Legends World Championship. Here's some numbers for perspective. In 2019, the League of Legends World Championship garnered 100 million viewers for the final round. To put that into perspective, the Super Bowl only garnered 98.2 million people in 2019. It's clear that esports is becoming an extremely dominant phenomenon in our society. But how did this all come to be? And how has gaming changed since we were kids? That's a topic that we're going to be covering today on this week's episode of The Cusp. We talk about what gaming was like when we were kids. We talk about how the technology has changed and how esports has arisen as a phenomenon. And we talk about some of the societal stigma around being a professional gamer, as well as the viability of esports eventually one day becoming an Olympic sport. Later on in the episode, we do a pivot and we talk about something a little bit different, which is VR. We dive into whether or not we'll see VR usage in video games in our lifetime, as well as whether or not we'll eventually see a sort of quasi-VR society that you can opt into when you grow old. This has been a really fun episode to record, and it's got a lot of interesting conversations, so I really hope you enjoy listening. And like always, if you're enjoying the pod, please share this with your friends. We want to get more people to listen. Follow us on social at The Cusp Pod and spread the word. Thanks, and we're just going to get into the pod now, so enjoy the listen. Bye-bye.
So I guess intro question for both of you guys. What's the first video game you really remember yourself being immersed in? And what did your parents think about it?
Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And I remember myself being immersed in it because my brother was immersed in it. It was either that game or NBA Kobe Bryant NBA Courtside 1998 or something like that. It was on the N64, and my parents were kind of just like they didn't want us to play too much video games because they wanted us to study and go outside and whatnot. But they weren't, I guess, mad about it because it kept us occupied, so they were all right with it.
Tom?
Yeah, I think mine is Super Nintendo Contra. There was like a shooting, like a one-person shooter game. And then there was also Super Nintendo, I don't know what it's called, but it was a soccer game. I think it was called World Soccer or something like that. Anyway, those two games, really addictive. Back in the day where you had to like blow on the cartridge if it got too dusty and then bash it
Yeah.
into the game. That
Yeah.
those
That's right.
those were cool.
The cartridge. That's how you know it's a throwback. It's not a CD. It's a cartridge.
Straight up cartridge. Ah, man.
Yeah.
Those things
Yeah,
used to
so
give
I
me
guess
so much stress.
What about you, Tone?
yeah, so like the first game I really remember was RuneScape, which is like just a classic MMORPG. And then I like the first game I remember getting incredibly like addictively immersed in was Skyrim, which I think came out in like 2011. I was probably
Mhm.
playing it in like grade 11 or 12.
That was
Yeah,
a
it
good
Um,
took
game.
it took
I
you to
yeah,
grade
I
11
yeah,
before
I
you
think
found a
I
game that
probably
was super.
downloaded it a few
Okay.
years after it came out, but it still like was great. Definitely held up. So I guess like the reason I asked that initial question was like when you think back to that time when you were really immersed in that game and you went to your parents and said, I want to be a professional esports gamer, what would they have said? Because the people who like succeeded at it started like then and they're around our age.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of cool. Well, first of all, I don't think I ever was that into it, but I know for a fact if I told my parents I wanted to be a professional gamer, as immigrant parents, they would have been like, hell no, you're not
Right.
doing that. Like, and I mean, to their credit, like, it's what, like, let's think about this. So, when we were little kids, early 2000s, was esports even on the horizon of being a viable profession for you to pursue? Like, were you even thinking, like, oh, when I grow up, I'm going to play video games and get paid for it? Like, the adults that play
Yeah,
video games,
no,
like,
for
all
Yeah,
sure.
the time were bums.
I
a hundred
definitely thought
percent,
that.
Oka. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I like you, Tony. Like Skyrim was a great game for me. Then there was a bunch of other RPGs, like even back to the day of Final Fantasy VII as well. So I was super immersed in gaming from like grade 5 to grade 8. But
Right.
I never thought it would be a real profession until I was watching this documentary where it wasn't necessarily esports, but it was a guy who was hired by a gaming company, and his job title was like tester, and all he does is play the games before they're released and try and find out all the bugs in the game. And I was like, is this for real? Is this is this something I can actually do? Just sit down on my couch and get paid to play a game before it comes out? Like that's amazing. It didn't get to the level of competitive gaming against other people. That wasn't really around. You had your local like LAN parties, so where your friends would come together and you connect multiple screens and then you all play in the same room. The whole like online esports competitive nature hadn't really come up at that time.
Do you think it's specific online communities that shifted that? Because Tom, you're right. Like I remember LAN parties. Like I never really like had it as much, but I remembered seeing it, briefly as a child. Like as a child, but I also remember games like I think it was Counter Strike, World of Warcraft, Halo, and it just kind of created even Super Smash Bros. Actually, Super Smash Bros. Is a great example, even though it's not online. Like Super Smash Bros. Melee was a game that I was addicted to. That's become like a really famous kind of gaming tournament game. Like uh, the advent of online gaming, as well as the advent of like video services to showcase people's gaming, I think changed a lot of this from when we were kids.
I think uh, this is one of those situations. Like to go back to what you said earlier, Encore. Like to your parents' credit, they didn't let you do this. I don't necessarily think so. I think certainly it was an industry of the future, but the writing was certainly on the wall. Um, the people I know that tried to be professional gamers, and I only know a few, definitely had like conflict with their parents because of that decision. And some of them
Mm-hmm.
like were successful for a time and then left and went on to do other like really great successful things because they were gaming and that took a lot of ambition and drive to get to that level. And then they just applied that to something else like school or a trade or something else. So I think it was just new, so a lot of parents reflexively cracked down on it. And I think yeah, to their detriment because their kid could have been the kid that won like millions of dollars playing Fortnite, right? Like we're seeing now people in their early 20s or even like their teens winning these massive prize pots. Um, playing
Do you
games.
think
So
it's like it was like a prestige thing though? Like I think now when we look at gaming now, we look at the massive prize money, we look at the professional nature of the teams, we look at the broadcasting, and so we look at the fact that major brands like are sponsoring some of these tournaments. There is definitely a credibility and appeal to it. But do you think in the early days when a so much was unknown, but b it was like almost a sense of there, it wasn't necessarily cool to be a professional gamer back in the day. I would say as compared to now when all the networks are available.
and
I
again,
don't think
this
it's
is sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think it's an idea of it's become cool or not cool. I think it's always been cool to play competitive games against your friends. I think what
Yeah.
really happened is just technology got better. That you could not now you could not you don't have to play a LAN party with your neighbors or your friends from school. You can now play online against anybody in the whole world. Like that, like
Mm.
the technology increasing just made I think it got gaming to a critical mass that money could get involved in.
But Tom, I'm saying there's a difference between like us playing online games and pursuing a career as in esports or
Yeah,
in
of course.
gaming, right? And
But
that's what I'm saying. Like I didn't think that was cool back in the day. I think gaming has been fun and cool since we were
but
kids. It's just
well,
like
I think that's like your opinion though. Like for personally, like I don't think that's a. I think it's fair to say that there is a societal take on video gaming, or professional gaming that doesn't give them necessarily the credibility that other quote sports get, and it's because they're not engaging in like that physical activity, which I think is a super boomer take on this. Um, like when you have
hmm,
$100 million prize pool for a gaming tournament, you should get credibility, in my view,
mhm.
because at that point the talent you're attracting is very high level. Um, and certainly it hasn't gotten to the point that like when we have a Michael Jordan of the professional gaming world, I think is when it'll really become mainstream.
Mm.
Uh, but we haven't yet. That said, as like a kid, if you told me, "Hey, like we'll pay you 200 grand a year and like you can be a professional gamer," I'm completely on board.
Mhm.
Um, like I think like that's probably what changes it for a lot of these professional gamers. Like when they start
The
bringing in
financial
income,
incentives.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think then they kind of get that credibility.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, I
I
think
think
that's what's changed the most.
Yeah, but I think there's nothing different between like the reflex you're talking about and the same reflex working against a young South Asian kid that wants to become like an artist or a musician, right?
Mm.
Like there's still that credibility, and I don't think it's good. Like I think it just robs society of a lot of talent and someone passionately
Mhm.
pursuing something.
No, and I don't think it is either. I think it's more just like this is what I observed was the societal stigma around it when I was a kid versus as I got older and the industry gained credibility and it became more viable. So if parents saw that their kids actually had serious talent in this, they saw this as both a viable career path as well as a financially lucrative career path that they're really good at it.
See, but I don't know though. Like I still think that most parents today, if their kid wants to be a professional gamer, would still have some of that stigma.
Mm.
Like I think society just needs to catch up a bit.
The question I was going to ask earlier though was like, if you were a parent and your kid wanted to play esports, would you be like, yeah, totally go for it? Like, how would you feel about that?
I think I would apply like the same logic to as I'd apply to like any career. You know what I mean? Like, are you passionate about it? Do you think you're good at it? Are you gonna work hard at it? Um, what's the risk versus benefit analysis here? Like
Hmm.
it depends. It depends how
Mm-hmm.
appreciable a chance they have. Like if I had a
Mm-hmm.
kid and they wanted to be an NBA player and they were gonna grow up to be my height, I would be like, no.
I think
Yeah.
what's on that note too, what's really funny is like esports also has injury, like risk of injury. So there's quite a few esports players who are, the whole ergonomic trend around making sure you have the right gaming equipment, the right gaming controller. There's gamers who have carpal tunnel now, and that might hurt their career going forward forever. So again, you evaluate the same risks you would if your child was going to play a professional sports.
Yeah, and I think on that note, the things that Tony mentioned about like how good are you, how passionate are you, all that kind of stuff, I think is very important. So I would apply the same lens, but I'd also apply like, okay, if you're gonna be in a gaming setup for most of the day, I probably just make like certain things like, okay, while you're in the house, I want you to spend a little bit of time outside. I want you to get some fresh air, just because I know that this is what you're working on, and that's great. But I think that I just don't want them to get too immersed into it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, see, and this is where we depart, because it's like if Tony Jr. is putting in the grind on like Counter-Strike 50, like I'm okay with that. Like
You
takes a
get the
lot to be
paper,
the
yeah.
goat. Takes a lot to be the
Yeah,
goat.
true.
Like if they want to get to that
True.
level, it's like what are you gonna
True.
you gonna go to MJ and be like, get off the court, get outside, you know, like
Nah. You're right. No, that's true. That's true.
So, up until now, we've really talked about our relationship with video games as a kid and how the viability of becoming a professional esports player has changed since we were kids. But we haven't really talked about how video games themselves have transitioned into esports and what really makes esports unique. So in this next section, Tony's going to walk through how esports came to be and kind of what events led to the creation of esports as we see it today.
I guess the biggest change is that until relatively recently, so about 10 years ago, most games were pay to play, so you couldn't necessarily stream them online without distributing content that you didn't have a right to distribute. Most of the video games featured today in esports competitions are free to play. So that means events and streams are organized and authorized by video game developers, and that anyone in the world can just install this game on their computer or even just play it on their web browser, and that's all you need to do. So it makes video games a lot more accessible to the average person, and it also creates these new business models uh, for esports. So you can now have independent streaming services. You can have advertisers approach players and profit off their public image. You can have like professional clubs created to organize esports players, to draft people, which is something that's happening now. So
Yeah,
you're
and
even
and
seeing
just
this kind of. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, just on that drafting note, I wanted to say like they draft players from all around the world because, like you said, everyone has access to these games. So we have cities in a bunch of cities across North America and across the world. We often have theater houses, so your cinemas would often they will often rent out their space on weekends for large tournaments, so that people can get noticed and get drafted from those tournaments as well. And it happens all across the world.
And we should also talk about kind of the rise of streaming services like Twitch, independent of the professional esports world. So on a forum like Twitch, an individual player can receive donations, can generate a following, can play multiple different games, and I think like the quintessential example of this would be someone like PewDiePie. He's like the most mainstream person. I think he has the most. Still think he has the most subscribers on YouTube. I don't know if that's changed. Um, so a lot of these people do generate very large followings, and you're starting to see that esports is kind of emulating the more traditional model of sports, but also kind of adding a different component to it because of that accessibility. I think it's the same
Yeah,
reason soccer is possible. All you need is a ball and two nets, right?
yeah, and I kind of agree just on like independent streamers. Because it's funny, we all kind of started, especially if you had siblings in your house, you kind of watched each other play a game. Like even if you weren't playing, it was kind of interesting to watch them play a game. And then YouTube came along, and then you could watch other people play games. And then Twitch became a dedicated resource for you to watch other people play games, give you like tips on how to do well in the game, give you walkthroughs. And that kind of community left like your home to like YouTube to Twitch. And then I think when esports, when those game publishers saw that there's a lot of traction in people watching these games online, I think I think that's kind of what set the scene for competitive esports to really take place.
Yeah, so I guess like question for you, like would you ever see yourself as an esports viewer? Uh Not necessarily just like a player. And I got like I think anyone that's really played video games that's our age has probably seen streams of some kind. But I think I imagine it being like as regular as like the way you watch sports. Like, could you ever see yourself doing that with esports?
I think so. I think the beauty of esports is there's so many different games, right? So you find the game that you like and then you watch that. So I'm not a big fan of watching like World of Warcraft or League of Legends or what have you. I'm not a big fan of those. But if it's a FIFA tournament online, yeah, I'll watch that.
Hmm. Yeah,
Mm.
I think that's a huge advantage of esports is the variety. It's almost like you're watching different sports, right? Like it's because like FIFA as a game is very different from World of Warcraft, is very different from Call of Duty, right? Or Super Smash Bros. So I think I could see myself watching it if I was really into the game. If I was like maybe I was playing the game and I wanted to see what the best of the best played.
Yeah. On that note of watching it though, there's been so much talk about esports finally getting Olympic status, being an officially recognized sport for the Olympics that countries can actually send a team to. So what I wonder how they're going to make that work. Like which games would officially count as an esports game, and if it does go through, would you guys be excited to like see your country represented in esports, like in the Olympics through esports? Because this will give access to countries that don't have like traditional track and field athletes, but might have sick, World of Warcraft gamers.
Yeah, I mean, like I totally think they should have an esports component to the Olympics. And just to defend my view, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to jump on it and be like, oh, the Olympics has been around forever. You can't change it like that. There are already, like, sports at the Olympics where you're not entirely relying on, like, your physical acumen. Like, you're using a medium, like archery, shooting, shot put. Like, a lot of the, like, pole vaulting or whatever. Like, you're not necessarily achieving those feats on your own. You need some kind of mechanism to do it. So I think like esports is just the next level of that. And I really don't think it's like easy to be an esports professional player. Like it takes a lot of commitment, a lot of dedication, all the things that the Olympics is kind of supposed to represent. And as for like if I would cheer for our team, like obviously, uh, if we send our best. I know like UBC apparently has like they're like giving people scholarships to play on an esports team at UBC. So I
That's cool.
Yeah,
yeah,
even
so
even on,
I
on that note too, like for FIFA, for example, we have like clubs like Manchester City, Arsenal, traditional footballing clubs are having an esports team as well, sponsored under that name, and they've bought in players as well. So
Oh,
it's
it's a
expanding.
great branding move. It's a great
Exactly.
branding move.
and
Um,
it's forward thinking too because this is going to become a significant sport, and I feel like it's one of those things where I don't think there's going to be like a national league. So theoretically, the like UBC could field a team and play against colleges from around the world, not just be reliant on like playing against people who are physically close to them, like a lot of sports are.
That's a good point. I mean, the fact that you don't have to travel is a key advantage. I know that like I'm an NBA fan, and I've thought about what it'd be like to have NBA teams across the world, and just logistically, it'd be so difficult to execute, and that's a big thing that esports has an advantage with. But just want to push back on one thing with regards to the Olympics, and this isn't to say that you can't make it an Olympic sport. I'd just be curious how they would get past this specific challenge. One of the things that we discussed earlier was there's so many different esports games. How
Yeah,
do you determine like which games are like the ones that they use at the Olympics?
great
And
point.
also just because the other thing is, and this is just maybe we could discuss how we get past this. Um, gaming as a medium is something that always evolves. There's certain games that people play for decades afterwards, such as maybe like Counter-Strike or Super Smash Bros. Melee or whatever. But a lot of the times people are always looking for the latest, greatest thing to play, and then they'll get really good at a game, and then a new update will come out. My question is like, do you use the same Olympic esport for like a decade, 2 decades? Like, how do you update those esports? So, which esports do you use, and how do you update them? Those are just two logistical questions that I'd have.
So great points. I think like I don't know how to necessarily solve those two issues, but I'd just like to present a kind of a spin-off problem that I've been thinking about those issues. How do you make sure that whatever these like the esports industry is equitable to players? Because the average player in esports, from what I understand, has a much shorter professional life than like a sports player because video games keep changing. So someone could be good at Counter Strike, but then when Counter Strike kind of falls out of favor and the public is less interested in it, they maybe gotten 2 3 years as a professional player in, and it's very difficult to have transferable skills and learn a new game from scratch after that. You know, it's like if you
Mm-hmm.
approached the NBA and said all of you have to play baseball. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
the attrition rate wouldn't be great. So, um,
Well, maybe it. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. So I think there are some places that are kind of addressing this. So an example would be like the professional esports clubs I mentioned earlier. What they do is like they pool their resources and like all the prize money they win into almost like a pension fund and like allocate it depending on your performance. So you still get like a payout. It's not just like you play for 3 years and then like a lot of them end up becoming commentators. A lot of them end up becoming like coaches. Some of them do manage to play other games. That said, like I think I'm not sure how it compares monetarily. My guess is the average esports player, because of the constant evolution of gaming, is going to end up making less money. But what I would counter that with like, okay, so you're 25, you can no longer play your game, but you've made 3 million, 4 million, $5 million playing. That's still a good life. You have a lot of opportunity there. Um, and you might not be able to play 10 or 15 years and make $100 million like some superstars that are like some superstar athletes. But like I don't necessarily think that these players are getting screwed. Obviously, there's
Yeah,
going to be
Yeah,
some circumstances where they are though.
yeah. So
yeah,
I think there's there's two different type of updates, right? So there's like I'll talk about FIFA because that's the one I'm probably most experienced with. So FIFA is a soccer game that everyone plays, and there's FIFA 15 for 2015, and then every year they kind of add another. They do updates to the game, so it becomes 2016, 2017, 2018, etc. Those kind of updates would give longevity to those players because it doesn't change the whole fundamentals of the games. There's little tweaks that make the game a little bit more interesting every year, but fundamentally, the same players that are good in FIFA, 16 will be good in FIFA 17. So I think for some games,
Mm,
they wouldn't have that problem. But for other games that
yeah,
are probably more stylistic and storytelling, like your Counter Strike ones, updates to those games could be quite critical. They could change the dynamic of the game completely, which I think is detrimental to the players. But as a fan, as a viewer, I think it makes it very, very interesting compared to other sports that don't change as much, right? For like many years, the 100-meter dash of like in the Olympics is the same, right? It's just 10 people on the line and they run for like 10 seconds. It's the same thing every year, right? But in esports, those little tweaks, those little changes in the game could make viewing a whole different experience every time it comes around, right?
Yeah, it'll be interesting
Mm-hmm.
to see whether the esports industry can kind of adapt. And like, because a huge component of wanting to play video games is that the audio visual elements are innovative and unique and new. It'll be interesting to see whether they can still have the fundamentals of the game be largely the same with maybe some tweaks so professional players can continue to play.
Hmm.
Um, versus completely changing those to correspond with the new audiovisual elements. Um,
Yeah. On that note, Tony, of like audiovisual elements, there's one thing that gamers and the gaming industry has been touting as the next wave of gaming, and it hasn't really happened yet, and that's virtual reality.
yeah,
So we will we've been told that virtual reality headsets are going to become mainstream in every house. Everyone's going to play these fully immersive games where they enter the world of the game, and they can have their own character
they
in the
play a
game, and
game.
it's a full auditory visual experience, right? It's meant to truly change the game of the gaming industry, but it just hasn't really happened yet. I think and I think it's because, the gear that you need is still quite expensive. It's still pretty clunky to have around in your home, and there's so many like adjustments you have to make possibly to your TV, to your console itself. It just really hasn't gone mainstream. So my question to you guys is, do you think like that virtual reality element could really go mainstream? And how would that even mix if esports in the esports as world as well? If you have esports athletes in virtual reality headsets as well.
So I guess like
Ooh,
I definitely think that virtual reality is going to be a huge emerging industry.
agreed.
If only because a lot of money is being invested into virtual reality R&D. So I think there's just inevitably going to be some payoffs there. Do I think it'll become mainstream? I think it kind of depends. Like, if virtual reality is really just simulating your auditory and visual senses, um, then it's not true virtual reality in the way we think about it, like in terms of like sci-fi movies, right? Um, we're just like playing a top of the line video game, and I think either way, I can see a lot of people wanting to do that. Um, but in terms of like true virtual reality, I think it'll take a lot longer to get there. Um, though I think just inevitably there's enormous mainstream appeal of virtual reality, and it'll be cool if kind of esports and virtual reality be like join hand in hand, because we might end up with in a situation like Ready Player One, or like again like these sci-fi movies or novels, um, where everyone's just part of the game and like they have an online persona, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, what was I gonna say? I think VR, it's eventually gonna become a thing. I don't know when it'll actually blow up. I really hope it does blow up because I've thought about that since I was a kid. Like, oh, I can't wait till this actually becomes a thing. It'd be so much fun and so cool to do. Um, two things that I've thought about it. Number one, we are already starting to see VR used at least in industrial ways. Like, for example, I worked with a company back in the day that was doing like VR training for oil and gas like operators out there. So we're already starting to see it get employed. I don't know when it'll get into the consumer household from a gaming perspective, but we are starting to see more industry uses of it. So that's a positive sign. The other thing I'd say is I think what VR would allow is it could allow secondary careers for individuals whose like let's say for individuals whose profession aligns well with the mandate of the game. So like for example, if Call of Duty ever became like a VR experience, I feel like ex-soldiers could have been like, yeah, you know what? After I was done serving the army, I went on COD and like I just had all this experience from doing it in real life, and now I could
That's that's
dominate in COD
that's an interesting thing. Like even you
as
could
an
even have
esport.
ex-sports players like Michael Jordan come back and play 2K against everybody. I don't know. Could be
And
interesting.
I think we're missing like a huge element here, which isn't necessarily how VR relates to esports, but just to like everyday people's lives. Like, spoiler alert, Black
Hmm.
Mirror has this episode where they like these everyone that's like a senior citizen basically like goes into this VR world where they're super young and just they get up to no good, right? So I feel like it could make life a lot easier for people who have issues with like paralysis of certain parts of their body, or terminally ill patients, or very old patients, like or just people who just aren't content with their day-to-day life. Like, they could go into this VR experience and have some semblance of happiness. That is obviously dangerous for like the everyday person, and it'll be interesting to see how society reacts to that, because if you if everyone just has an out where they're like, okay, I'll just go into a VR paradise, it'll be interesting to see how many people persevere through like everyday life.
Yeah, I mean, especially I don't think this is a bit of a stretch, but especially in some certain communities, because I think of Japan. Japan is probably like arguably the home nation of gaming, right? And they have huge problems with loneliness, especially at an adult age where there's just a lot of people that live on their own. They don't have any significant other partner, and they stay indoors like 24/7 gaming and doing other things. Um, if virtual reality does become this full body immersive experience and escape, I wonder how many more people would end up in that kind of situation where they just, I don't want to say give up, but they just kind of don't really participate in the real society, and they just live this full on second life in the virtual reality world. I
So
I
I
think
my question though, is that necessarily bad? Um, like I personally don't have any moral judgment towards someone that says, you know what, like, my day to day life sucks for some reason. Maybe it's out of their control, maybe it's within their control. And they say, you know what, I just want to go into a VR paradise because it's an option and it exists and I want to. Like, I'm not going to judge that person personally.
but I think
I think it depends.
yeah, exactly. It depends. If a lot of people are doing that, like that's gonna harm society on the outside, right? In the real world. If like we're so interconnected with the economy and everything, like we can see already during this whole pandemic situation anyway. If we just have a whole segment of society just deciding not to play a part in it, I think that could harm us in ways we can't even imagine right
That's
Yeah, I
interesting.
think it also affects relationships and interconnection. Like if you are using virtual reality as a form of escapism from your life, then it might affect people closest to you because they're getting less of you. I know. I don't know. I think like individual case by case, it could be very beneficial. But like what Tom said, when we have a large portion of society doing it, then we start to see problems.
Outside of, virtual reality gaming, Tony, I think the point that you brought up originally of like elderly people who have already lived their life and they kind of have this chance to live a second life through virtual reality. If you guys had that option, would you take it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But
No,
like, I'm also the guy that would like go to Mars at 60, right? From a previous episode. Like, retirement doesn't seem like a fun time to me. So
Yeah.
if I can do
I don't
something,
ever want to be fully retired. Like, I always want to be doing something. Like, I don't think I'll ever. I don't think I want to be working like full time when I'm very old. But I do want to have something that keeps me stimulated, something that keeps me going. You know what I mean? Like, I don't
Or
know.
you could
I
just
couldn't.
or you could just live a life in virtual reality where you're 20 years old again, you know?
yeah, but like, I
I mean,
hated
I
being 20. Like, so it really
wait. You
depends
hate?
like what there is to offer. Like,
Yeah.
if see, and this is relevant too. If we're thinking about like ourselves aged 50 years, 60 years, whatever. but we might have
Mhm.
different lives then. Maybe at that age you want to spend time with your grandkids, you know,
Mhm.
or do things like
Mhm.
that. But what if they're in the game? You know, like I'm
Yeah,
sure a
Everybody's in
just
lot
the
of
like
game.
grandparents have that experience. Like we laugh about it, but I'm sure a lot of people
Yeah.
are like, why is my kid always like fucking online? Um
yeah.
so I think but I think like that'll change. Like I think our generation hopefully will have a lot more understanding, um and be able to kind of use the forums and the mediums as well.
That's actually a good question in the sense that one thing that I've noticed with the elderly people in my life, at least, is they're not as necessarily as comfortable with the new technology that's come out. And my question for, I guess, both of you is because we've grown up in a world where technology has changed so much and we've kind of been forced to learn this technology as we grow up, do you think you'd be comfortable adopting to whatever our grandkids are using? Or would you be like, nah, I'm good. Give me my laptop and my keyboard. That's what I want. I don't want to like call me a luddite, but I don't want to use your neural brain sensor
Yeah,
thing.
I think us, because we're a generation that has lived through the digital like revolution, like the pace of change we've experienced, I think has made us more open to the idea that that kind of pace of change can happen again,
Mm.
more so than our parents. So I think, would we fully understand our grandparents' technology? Probably not. But would we be more willing to embrace it? I think so.
Yeah, I think we forget sometimes that we were like born right on the cusp of like the biggest like telecommunications innovation in human history, right? So that has fundamentally changed human history. Like it just has. Um, I don't know whether we're gonna be immune to those changes. Like I talked to an older person the other day about this, and like their explanation was like, when you get older, you're gonna realize it's not that your grandparents and your parents don't have the capacity to learn this frustrating thing you're always doing for them, like starting a Skype call or creating a WhatsApp group, whatever. They just don't want to. Like they're just at an age where they don't want to deal with the bullshit, right? And I can
Right.
see us getting to that age too, like easily, where it's like, oh fuck, you have the new VR model, like I'm chill with my VR model, like ooh, like you know what I mean, like I can definitely see not like our rate of adaptation changing, but just it getting to be like unnecessary. It like cause if you get to 50 and you're a happy person, like you're a happy person. That said, to like answer your question, Unquer, no, I don't ever want to be this like luddite that's like scared of technology and like not willing to adapt like that. Like and maybe this is us being young and saying this, like it's a lot easier, but personally I don't ever want to be that person.
That's all for today, everyone. Thanks a bunch for listening. We really appreciate it. If you're enjoying the pod, we'd love it if you could share this with your friends and let them know about the pod. We'd love for the pod to grow. We'd also love it if you're using Apple Pods, if you can go on there and give us a review. That's just a great way for us to get the podcast to be more popular on Apple's platform. And finally, if you're not already, you could follow us on all of our social platforms. We're available at The Cusp Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we also have all the episodes up on YouTube. So if you prefer to listen on YouTube as well, you can do that as well. Cool. Thank you so much for listening again. Hopefully you're enjoying the pod. And yeah, you know what? Have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.